There is a moment, and most people who have lived long enough know exactly what moment I'm talking about, where someone sees you. Not the version of you that you show the world. Not the polished version, not the capable version, not the one that has it together and knows what to say. The real you. The hungry you. The one that hasn't eaten in 2 days and is trying very hard not to let it show on your face. Most people walk past that version of you. Most people look right through it. But every once in a great while, and this is the part that changes a life, somebody stops. In the fall of 1988, in a small town in rural Georgia, a 9-year-old girl named Cora Mae Simmons stopped. The boy she stopped for was 8 years old, standing behind the school gymnasium with his back against the wall and his lunch bag deliberately left at home so nobody would know it was empty. His name was James Ellington. And what Cora Mae did for him that afternoon, and for the 5 months that followed, set in motion a chain of events so quietly powerful that 32 years later, the entire town of Millhaven, Georgia would still be talking about it. This is not a fairy tale. This is not a fantasy. This is what actually happened when one little girl decided that another child's hunger was her problem to solve, and what happened when the boy she fed came back to find her. Before we go any further into this story, I need you to understand something. When James Ellington came back to Millhaven, Georgia in the fall of 2020, he did not come back quietly. He did not slip in through a side door or arrange some private meeting at a restaurant. He drove into town in a car that cost more than most of the houses on Cora Mae Street, and he knocked on her front door on a Tuesday morning, unannounced, holding something in his left hand that he had kept for 32 years. And what he was holding was so specific, so particular to the story of who these two people were to each other, that the moment Cora Mae opened that door and saw it, she had to grab the door frame to hold herself up. Now, before we get to what he was holding, before we get to what he said when she opened that door, and before we get to the thing that Cora Mae said back to him that made the two men standing behind James Ellington exchange a look, we need to go back. We need to go all the way back to 1988, to a school called Millhaven Elementary, to a little girl with an extra biscuit in her lunch bag, and a level of human decency that most grown adults have never managed to achieve. And we need to understand what the world looked like for James Ellington before Cora Mae decided to see him. Because you cannot understand what he came back to do until you understand what she gave him, and what it actually cost her. Millhaven, Georgia in the late 1980s was the kind of town that geography had not been kind to. It sat about 40 miles southeast of Macon, far enough from anything to feel isolated, but close enough to the highway to know what it was missing. The economy had never quite recovered from the mill closings of the early 70s, and by the time Ronald Reagan was finishing his second term in the White House, Millhaven was doing what a lot of small southern towns were doing, holding on by its fingernails and calling it fine. It was into this town, and into a particular corner of it that even Millhaven's residents referred to as the hard side, that Robert Ellington had brought his family in 1984. Robert Ellington was not a bad man. He was not cruel. He was not violent, and he worked when he could find it. But he was unreliable in the way that some men are. Unreliable like weather, like a screen door that latches 9 times out of 10, but never when a storm is coming. He had married a woman named Dorothy, who was the kind of person that the word good was invented to describe. Patient, quiet, and possessed of a faith in things working out that should have been exhausted years before it actually was. Together, Robert and Dorothy had 3 children. James was the middle one, born in 1980, the one who watched everything and said little. Even at 8 years old, James Ellington had the quality of a person who was always doing 2 things at once, being present in the room and simultaneously watching the room from somewhere just above it. His teachers noticed it. His first-grade teacher had written on a progress report that James was unusually observant for his age, which was teacher language for, "This child is paying attention to things children are not supposed to have to pay attention to." What she meant, though she could not write it on the form, was that James knew how to read the temperature of a room the way a child learns to when the temperature of a room has consequences. He knew when his father was about to make a decision that would affect the electricity bill. He knew when his mother's smile was the kind that cost her something. And he knew, with the particular precision of a child who has learned hunger intimately, exactly how to make himself take up less space when there was not enough to go around. The fall of 1988 was one of the hard seasons for the Ellington family. Robert had lost a construction job in August, and the gap between what Dorothy's cleaning work brought in and what 4 people needed to live on was not a small gap. James, who was in 3rd grade by then, had started leaving his lunch bag at home. Not because he forgot it, because the lunch bag was empty most mornings, and it was easier to leave it than to carry the evidence of what wasn't in it. He had developed a system. He would drink extra water at breakfast, if there was breakfast, and he would position himself at the back of the cafeteria line so that by the time he got to the window, he could truthfully tell whoever was watching that he had already eaten. He was 8 years old. He had already become skilled at the particular art of managing other people's pity before it could reach him. Cora Mae Simmons was the daughter of a woman named Ruth Simmons, who cleaned houses for a living and sang in the choir at Greater Vine Baptist Church every Sunday morning with a voice that, as people in Millhaven still say, made you believe in something even if you had stopped believing. Cora Mae's father, a man named Gerald Simmons, had left when Cora Mae was 4, not in the dramatic way, not with a scene or a final argument, but in the slow way that some people leave, a little more absent each week until one morning the absence is simply the permanent condition. Ruth did not speak badly of Gerald in front of Cora Mae. She did not have to. The facts of their life, the careful way Ruth counted change at the grocery store, the way the lights sometimes went off for a few days before Ruth could get to the utility company, spoke for themselves in the language that children understand before they have words for it. What Ruth Simmons gave her daughter, in the place of things she could not provide, was a standard, a way of seeing the world and the people in it. She told Cora Mae, more than once and in different ways depending on the season and what was required, "Baby, you never know what somebody is carrying. So you treat everybody like they might be carrying something heavy, because most of the time they are." Cora Mae Simmons took this instruction and made it into a way of living so thoroughly that by the time she was 9 years old, it was simply who she was. She was not a loud child. She was not the one at the center of the room or the first one to speak. But she was the one who noticed the boy at the back of the cafeteria line who never seemed to have a tray. She was the one who watched, over the course of 2 weeks, the pattern that James Ellington repeated every single day. Back of the line, water from the fountain, positioned near the door so he could leave before anyone looked too closely. She said nothing to him about it directly. That was important, the not saying. Because Cora Mae understood, at 9 years old, something that a lot of adults spend decades learning. That there is a kind of help that humiliates, and a kind of help that preserves a person's dignity, and the difference between the two is everything. So instead of walking up to James Ellington in the cafeteria, where everyone could see, she did something different. One Thursday afternoon, she found him behind the gymnasium after school, the spot he had claimed as his waiting place while his older sister finished her after-school activity, and she sat down beside him in the dirt like she had been planning to sit there all along. She had her lunch bag with her. She reached into it, pulled out a biscuit wrapped in wax paper, her grandmother's recipe, the kind that takes 20 minutes to make and disappears in 45 seconds, and she set it on the ground between them without making any ceremony of it. Then she started talking about a cartoon she had seen the previous Saturday morning, a funny scene that she described in enough detail that James, despite himself, started to smile. He ate the biscuit. She kept talking. Neither of them acknowledged what had just happened. That was the beginning. What followed was not a single act of kindness. That is the part of this story that I need you to stay with, because it is the part that changes everything about what comes later. What followed was 5 months. 5 months of Cora Mae Simmons finding a way, every single school day, to make sure that James Ellington ate something. And she did it in ways that were so considered, so carefully constructed to protect his dignity, that when James Ellington talks about this period now, and he does talk about it, in interviews and in the rare moments of personal disclosure that billionaires permit themselves, he says that what Cora Mae gave him was not food. He says that what she gave him was the experience of being cared for by someone who asked nothing in return and made no performance of the caring. The logistics of what she pulled off, for a 9-year-old girl, were not simple. She could not simply double her own lunch every day, because Ruth Simmons was counting every biscuit and every portion, and an unexplained doubling of the grocery bill would have produced questions. So Cora Mae did what children do when they are more resourceful than the adults around them realize. She improvised. She traded chores with a girl in her class named Patrice in exchange for half of Patrice's lunch on Tuesdays. She told her grandmother she wanted to learn to make sandwiches herself and used the independence that gave her to control what went into her bag. She saved portions from her own dinner on nights when there was enough to save. She was 9 years old, and she was running what amounted to a small logistical operation powered entirely by compassion and a level of forward thinking that her teacher, had she known about it, would have found remarkable. James Ellington, for his part, understood what was happening. He was not fooled by the casualness of the gesture, the way Cora Mae always made it seem accidental. "Oh, my grandmother packed too much again. You want this?" Because James had been watching people carefully since he was old enough to know that watching people carefully was necessary. He knew it was deliberate. He knew it was sustained. And he knew, in the particular way that people know things they cannot say yet, that it cost her something. He ate. And he said nothing, because saying something would require them both to look directly at what was happening. And they had both silently agreed that looking directly at it would ruin the thing that made it bearable. The agreement held for 5 months. Until the afternoon in February of 1989, a cold, gray Friday, when James Ellington sat down beside Cora Mae behind the gymnasium and found that she was not her usual self. She was quieter than normal. She handed him half a peanut butter sandwich without the customary small talk. And James, who noticed everything, noticed that her lunch bag was lighter than usual and that she was eating nothing herself. He looked at the sandwich in his hand. He looked at her. He said, "Cora Mae, did you eat?" She looked at him for a moment, and this is the moment, when James tells this story, where his voice changes. She looked at him and said, "I had a big breakfast." He knew it wasn't true. He knew it the way you know a thing when you have been hungry enough yourself to recognize the lie of it. He sat with that knowledge for a long time, and then he did something that Cora Mae Simmons did not expect. He broke the sandwich in half and put one half back in front of her. He said, "Then you can have this back, because I had a big breakfast too." She looked at him. He looked at her. And then she laughed, the real kind, the kind that surprises you. And she took the half, and they sat there in the cold eating half a peanut butter sandwich each, and neither of them said anything about what that moment was. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. It was 3 weeks after the shared sandwich, the last week of February 1989, when James Ellington made the promise. The Ellington family situation had shifted slightly. Robert had picked up work again, the kind that paid in cash and lasted about as long as Robert's good intentions, which meant there was food in the house again and James's lunch bag was no longer empty. But something between James and Cora Mae had changed. The 5 months had done something to the geography of who they were to each other. They still met behind the gymnasium, but now it was not out of necessity. It was out of habit, and out of something neither of them had a word for yet. They talked in the way that 8- and 9-year-olds talk when they are actually talking, not about school, not about teachers, but about what they wanted. Cora Mae wanted to be a nurse. She said this with the certainty of someone who has already decided, not someone who is still deciding. She said she wanted to take care of people, fix the things that were broken in them, send them home better than they arrived. James said he wanted to build something. He was not specific about what. He just said he wanted to build something that was his, that nobody could take away because it was his, and he made it. There was a silence after he said that, the particular silence of something true. And then James Ellington, 8 years old, reached into his jacket pocket, because he had been carrying something for 3 weeks, ever since the day Cora Mae had given him her own half of the sandwich, and he held it out to her. It was a strip of ribbon, red, the kind that gets tied around packages at Christmas. He had found it in the classroom after the holiday party in December and kept it, though he could not have told you then why he kept it. He told her to hold out her wrist. She did. He tied the ribbon around it. It was not a precise bow. It was the bow of an 8-year-old boy doing something with great intention and limited fine motor skill. And then he said it. He said, "When I grow up and I get rich, I'm going to come back and marry you. I promise." Cora Mae looked at the ribbon on her wrist. She looked at James. She was 9 years old, and she understood that this was not a silly thing being said by a silly child. She understood that this was the most serious thing James Ellington had ever said to another person. She did not laugh. She did not tell him it was impossible. She said, "Okay, James. 2 words. The way you say 2 words when you mean them entirely." He moved away 6 months later. His family packed what they had into a borrowed truck on a Sunday night in August, and by Monday morning the desk that James Ellington had sat at in 3rd grade was occupied by another child. Cora Mae found out at school. She went home that afternoon and sat on the porch and looked at the ribbon on her wrist for a long time. She did not cry. She was 9 years old, and she had already learned, from watching her mother, that crying was a luxury you permitted yourself in private and briefly. She had also already learned something else, something that would carry her through the next 32 years in ways she could not yet imagine. She had learned that some things are real even when they are not present. Some things are true even when there is no evidence of them. Some things hold even when distance and time and the entire weight of the world presses against them. Cora Mae Simmons grew up. She did it in the way that the daughters of women like Ruth Simmons grow up, efficiently, quietly, without the luxury of extended uncertainty about who she was or what was required of her. She finished high school in Millhaven in 1997, one of the strongest students in her class, with a guidance counselor who told her she had the aptitude for anything and a financial reality that narrowed the field considerably. She applied to the nursing program at a community college in Macon and got in on a partial scholarship. She worked nights at a grocery store for 2 years to cover the rest. She graduated in 2001 and came back to Millhaven, which surprised people, because Millhaven was the kind of town that the capable left and the left behind stayed in, and Cora Mae Simmons was demonstrably capable. She came back because Ruth needed her. Ruth's health had begun its slow decline, the knees first, then the heart, the way it goes for women who have spent 30 years on their feet working for other people's comfort. Cora Mae came back and got a job at the county hospital and took care of her mother the way her mother had taken care of her, without announcement, without resentment, with the particular quality of attention that genuine love produces. She married in 2004. His name was Dennis Webb, and he was a decent man in the way that Millhaven produced decent men, steady, hard-working, not given to great heights or great depths, the kind of reliable that looks ordinary until it's gone. They had 2 children, a daughter named Aria in 2006, and a son named Marcus in 2009. Dennis worked in county maintenance. Cora Mae worked her nursing shifts. They built something modest and real and genuinely theirs. She still had the ribbon. She had never been able to explain to herself, entirely, why she kept it. She had not told Dennis about James Ellington, not because she was hiding something, but because the story felt like it belonged to a version of herself that existed before Dennis, and some things from before a marriage are private not out of deception, but out of the sense that they are yours. The ribbon lived in a small box in the top drawer of her dresser, under some folded handkerchiefs that had belonged to Ruth. She did not look at it often, but she knew it was there. Dennis Webb died in 2017. He was 44 years old, and the cause was a heart attack, and it was sudden in the way that the worst things are sudden. No warning, no preparation, no opportunity to say the things you would have said if you had known it was the last time. Cora Mae was 42. Aria was 11. Marcus was 8. She went back to work 5 days after the funeral, not because she was not grieving, but because grieving and working were not mutually exclusive for someone with her upbringing, and because there were 2 children who needed to watch their mother continue. She continued. James Ellington's journey out of Millhaven and into the life that would eventually bring him back to Cora Mae's front door was not a straight line. It was the kind of trajectory that looks, in hindsight, like it was always headed somewhere, but that, in the living of it, felt most of the time like controlled falling. The Ellington family landed in Birmingham, Alabama, in the fall of 1989. Robert found work at a parts warehouse. Dorothy found work cleaning offices. The apartment they rented was smaller than the house in Millhaven, but it had consistent heat, which was not a small thing. James went to a new school where he knew no one and spent the first semester sitting in the back of every room and cataloging what kind of place this was. It was a skill he had developed to a degree that his teachers consistently underestimated, and that his circumstances had made essential. He was quiet. He was watching. And by the time spring came, he had figured out how every system in his new school worked and which ones could be used to his advantage. By middle school, James Ellington had discovered mathematics. Not the way students discover a subject they like, but the way certain people discover the language they were supposed to have been born speaking. The one where everything suddenly makes sense, where patterns become visible that were previously just noise, where the world reveals an underlying order that nobody else in the room seems to be seeing as clearly as you are. His math teacher in 7th grade, a man named Mr. Augustus Holt, who had been teaching for 22 years and knew the real thing when he saw it, stayed after class one afternoon and told James, with the directness of someone who does not have time for indirection, that he was looking at a mind that needed to be fed the right things or it would find the wrong things to do with itself. Mr. Holt fed it. He gave James books, not textbooks, but books about business, about how money worked, about how the people who had built things had built them. He brought in a copy of a biography about a real estate developer who had started with nothing and built a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars. James read it in 3 days and came back to Mr. Holt's classroom with 12 questions that Mr. Holt said he had to look up before he could answer. James graduated high school in Birmingham in 1998. He had no money for college. He had a mind that several teachers over the years had described as exceptional, and he had a specific and burning desire to build something that was his and that nobody could take from him, a desire he had first articulated to a girl behind a gymnasium in Millhaven, Georgia, when he was 8 years old. He got a job at a property management company in Birmingham as a file clerk. He was 18 years old. Within 8 months, he had reorganized their entire filing system, identified 3 lease contracts that had clerical errors costing the company money, and taught himself enough about property law from library books to be having conversations with the attorneys the company retained that the attorneys found, at first surprising and then genuinely impressive. He was promoted to administrative assistant, then to property coordinator. Then, when he was 21 and the office manager position opened and the company offered it to someone from outside, James Ellington quit. Not dramatically. He thanked his employer, gave appropriate notice, and left with a clear plan already formed. He had saved $9,000. He used it to buy a distressed single-family home in a neighborhood in East Birmingham that the banks had written off, but that James, who had spent 3 years reading every city planning document he could access, believed was about to become valuable again. He was right. He fixed the house himself on weekends. He rented it. He refinanced it. He bought another. The compound effect of this process, over the next 15 years, is the kind of thing that looks simple in retrospect and is absolutely brutal in the execution. There were banks that said no so many times that James started keeping a notebook. Not as a grievance. He was very specific about this when he talked about it later. As a record, so that when the thing he was building was big enough to matter, he would know exactly who had bet against it. By 2010, Monroe, he had incorporated as Ellington Capital Group, had properties in Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee, and North Carolina. By 2015, the company had crossed into the kind of value that moves from impressive to institutional. By 2020, James Ellington was one of the most significant privately held real estate developers in the southeastern United States, with a net worth that multiple business publications had estimated, and that James himself declined to confirm or correct, somewhere in the range of $1.2 billion. He lived in Atlanta. He had an office in a building he owned in Buckhead. He had a team of 40 people and a reputation for being precise, unflappable, and nearly impossible to read in a negotiation. He had never married. He had been in relationships, real ones, in some cases, that lasted years, but they had all ended in the particular way things end when one person in the relationship suspects that the other is still carrying something they have not put down. He was still carrying something. He had been carrying it since 1989. He still had the red ribbon. He had kept it in a small envelope in the inside pocket of his wallet for the first 20 years, and when the wallet wore out and was replaced, he transferred the envelope to the new one. He had done this 4 times. He knew exactly which drawer of his desk at home it was currently in. And he knew, with the same certainty with which he could look at a distressed property and see what it would be, that he was not going to be finished carrying it until he went back to Millhaven. James Ellington had thought about going back to Millhaven many times over 32 years. He had not done it impulsively, because he did not do anything impulsively. This was both a professional strength and, as he would eventually acknowledge, a personal cost. He had located Cora Mae twice before he actually returned. The first time was 2008. He had hired a researcher, the same one his company used for due diligence on property acquisitions, and the researcher had found her in 3 days. She was in Millhaven, married, working at the county hospital as a registered nurse, living on a street 3 blocks from where she had grown up. He had the address. He sat with it for 4 months and did not use it. He told himself he was waiting until he was more established, but the truth, which he understood then even if he could not say it yet, was that he was afraid. Not of Cora Mae specifically. He was afraid of what it would mean to show up in front of the person who had seen him at his most vulnerable, 32 years later, and be required to account for all of it. The second time was 2018. By then he knew she was a widow. Her husband had died the previous year, and this information had come to him through the same research channel. He made the decision to wait. He did not want to be the thing that appeared at the edge of someone's grief like an opportunity. He would wait until she had her footing. He would wait until she was standing in her life again, fully, and then he would go. The decision to actually go happened in a specific moment in August of 2020. He was in a meeting, a large one, a room full of attorneys and investors, and people who were paid to be impressive, and someone made a comment, in passing, that was meant to be motivational. The comment was something about the future, something about building legacies. James did not hear the rest of the comment because his mind had left the room. He was thinking about a strip of red ribbon. He was thinking about a 9-year-old girl who had given him her own half of a sandwich on a cold February afternoon and lied about having a big breakfast so he wouldn't feel the weight of it. He excused himself from the meeting. He went to his office. He sat down and he wrote a letter. He had written drafts of this letter before, 3 of them, over the years, and discarded them all. This time he did not discard it. He wrote it in one sitting, revised it twice, and then put it in an envelope and did not seal it for 2 weeks while he decided whether he was actually going to do this. He sealed it on a Monday morning in September. He drove to Millhaven on a Tuesday in October. He brought 2 members of his personal staff, his assistant, a calm and thorough woman named Beverly, and a security consultant named Roy who had worked with him for 8 years. He told Beverly where they were going, but not specifically why. Roy, who had been with James long enough to know when not to ask questions, did not ask. They arrived in Millhaven on the morning of October 13, 2020. James spent the afternoon driving through the town slowly. Not the way a billionaire surveys a potential acquisition, but the way a person re-enters a place that holds the shape of who they used to be. He drove past the elementary school. He drove past the street where the Ellington family had rented their house. He drove past Greater Vine Baptist Church, where he had once attended vacation Bible school for 2 summers because Dorothy thought it was important, and where he could still picture the specific color of the carpet in the fellowship hall. He did not drive past Cora Mae's house that afternoon. That could wait until morning. He checked into a hotel in Macon. There was nothing in Millhaven, and he sat in his room and read the letter one more time. He changed one sentence. He sealed it again. He did not sleep particularly well. In the morning, he put on a dark suit. He looked at himself in the mirror for a long time, and then he reached into the inside drawer of his travel bag and took out a small envelope. He opened it. Inside was a strip of red ribbon, faded now from 32 years, still tied in the imprecise bow of an 8-year-old boy. He put it in his jacket pocket. Then he got in the car and drove to Millhaven. It was 8:20 in the morning when the black car turned onto Cora Mae Webb Street. Cora Mae was on the front porch. She was always on the front porch at this time of the morning. It was one of the things she had given herself in the years since Dennis died. This 20 minutes before the day required things of her, with coffee and the particular quality of morning light that Millhaven produced in October, the kind that is amber and low and makes everything look like it is lit from inside. She heard the car before she saw it. When it stopped in front of her house, she watched the door open. She watched a man get out. He was tall, taller than she would have expected from the boy she remembered, but of course 32 years do that. He was wearing a dark suit and no tie. His hair was cut close and graying at the temples. He had the posture of someone who has made a decision and is committed to it. He walked from the car to the foot of her porch steps and stopped there. He looked up at her. And Cora Mae Simmons Webb, 45 years old, registered nurse, widow, mother of 2, daughter of Ruth, granddaughter of the woman whose biscuit recipe had helped feed a hungry boy for 5 months. Cora Mae looked at this man standing at the foot of her steps and felt 32 years rearrange themselves inside her chest like furniture being moved back into the places it was always supposed to be. She said his name. James. He said, "Yes, ma'am." And then he reached into his jacket pocket. He took out the strip of red ribbon. He held it up so she could see it. Cora Mae Webb grabbed the door frame. She grabbed it the way you grab something when your legs have made a decision before your mind has finished catching up. She stood there for a moment that Beverly, watching from the car, would later describe as the longest moment she had ever witnessed from a front seat. And then Cora Mae said, "You kept it." He said, "I kept it." She said, "For 32 years." He said, "For 32 years." She looked at him for another moment. Then she said, "James Ellington, have you eaten breakfast?" He had not. She told him to come inside. He gave her the letter in the kitchen while the coffee was brewing. He set it on the table in front of her and said she could read it now or later. It was entirely her choice, and that he would be here either way. She read it then. She read it at her kitchen table with her coffee going cold beside her and James Ellington sitting across from her, watching the window with the particular discipline of someone allowing another person the privacy of their own reaction. The letter was 4 pages, handwritten. Cora Mae has not shared the specific contents of it publicly, and she should not have to. What she has said, in the one extended conversation she agreed to with a journalist from a black cultural publication in Atlanta in 2022, is that the letter did not read like something written by a billionaire. It read like something written by the boy she remembered, precise, careful, not prone to excess, but honest in a way that cost him something. She said that he wrote about the afternoon she gave him her half of the sandwich. He described it in detail she had not expected, the cold of the afternoon, the specific weight of that moment when he realized she had given away her own food, the way he had sat with that knowledge every day since. He wrote that he was not coming back to make a claim on anything. He was not coming back to collect on a promise made by a child. He understood that she had built a life, that she had loved and lost and built again, and that he had no standing to ask for anything. He was coming back, he wrote, because he had spent 32 years measuring every single act of generosity he had ever witnessed against the standard that a 9-year-old girl had set behind a gymnasium in Millhaven, Georgia, and nothing had ever come close. He wanted her to know that. He wanted her to know that the things she had done, not once, not twice, but every school day for 5 months, in the quiet and the cold, with no audience and no expectation of return, was the most important thing anyone had ever done for him. Not because of what it gave him in terms of food, because of what it told him about what human beings were capable of at their best. He had built everything he built, he wrote, with that knowledge underneath it like a foundation. He wanted her to know that. He also wrote, near the end, that he had never forgotten the promise, that he was not presenting it as a demand or an expectation, but that he was presenting himself, whoever he was now, 32 years later, as a person who had meant it. And that if she wanted nothing more from this morning than the knowledge that the boy she fed had grown into someone who came back, he would be grateful for that, and he would leave in peace. He signed it, James Ellington. Not the company name, not the title, just the name. Cora Mae read it twice. Then she folded it along its original creases and set it on the table. She picked up her coffee. She looked across the table at James Ellington and she said, "You wrote this by hand?" He said yes. She said, "How many drafts?" He said, "This was the 4th. Over about 15 years. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The sentence on the 3rd page. The one that starts, 'I have never been able to explain.' Did you change that one?" He looked at her. He said, "Yes. The night before I came." She nodded slowly. She said, "It shows. It's the best sentence in the letter." He said, "That's the sentence I almost took out." She said, "I know. That's why it's the best one." They talked for 3 hours that morning. Not about the money, not about the company, not about Atlanta, not about what this could become. They talked about the same things they had talked about behind the gymnasium in 1989, about what they had built, about what it cost, about what mattered when you got to the other side of the hardest years. He told her about Birmingham, about Mr. Holt and the biography and the $9,000 and the first house. She told him about nursing school and Ruth's decline and what it had been like to lose Dennis and how she had explained it to an 11-year-old and an 8-year-old in terms they could hold. He listened the way he had always listened, completely, with nothing left over for performing. She noticed that. At some point, Arya came downstairs. She was 14 now, and she had the quality of her mother, observant, precise, not easily impressed. She looked at this man sitting at her mother's kitchen table in a suit at 9 in the morning and said, "Who are you?" James looked at Cora Mae. Cora Mae looked at Arya. She said, "This is an old friend of mine, baby. His name is James." Arya looked at him for a long moment with the particular assessment of a 14-year-old girl who has been the woman of the house, in a certain sense, since she was 11. Then she said, "Are you the one that gave her the ribbon?" Cora Mae looked at her daughter. "How do you know about the ribbon?" Arya said, "Grandma Ruth told me before she died. She said there was a boy who gave you a red ribbon when you were little and that it meant something." James Ellington looked at Cora Mae. Cora Mae looked at her daughter. And then, for the first time that morning, Cora Mae Simmons Webb laughed. The real kind. The kind her mother used to produce. The kind that starts somewhere below everything that is managed and performed and comes out surprised and complete. She laughed, and James watched her laugh, and Beverly, who was still sitting in the car and could see through the kitchen window, told Roy quietly that she thought everything was probably going to be fine. Millhaven found out, because Millhaven always finds out. It is one of the immutable laws of small southern towns that nothing remains private long enough to actually be private, and the arrival of a black car and a billionaire at the Webb house on a Tuesday morning was the kind of event that the town's informal communication infrastructure, which is to say, the people who talk, processed with extraordinary speed. By Wednesday afternoon, the story had made it to Greater Vine Baptist Church, which meant it had effectively been published. By Thursday, Cora Mae's colleague at the hospital, a woman named Sandra who had been her closest friend for 11 years, had called 4 times. Cora Mae answered on the 4th. The responses were not all of the same kind. There were people who were purely and simply happy for her, the friends who had watched her hold everything together for 3 years since Dennis died, who had shown up with food and with presents and with the particular solidarity that women provide for each other in grief. These people called and texted and, in 2 cases, appeared at the door with dessert. There were others whose response was more complicated. There is a type of reaction that prosperity in one person can produce in a community that has experienced scarcity collectively, and it is not always clean. There were people who had known James Ellington as a child who now claimed a closeness to him that the record did not support. There was a woman, Cora Mae has never named her and has no intention of naming her, who made a comment in the parking lot of the grocery store about Cora Mae having landed on her feet pretty fast for a widow. Cora Mae heard about this secondhand, via Sandra, and her response was to say nothing publicly, which was the most effective response available and the one most consistent with who she was. In Atlanta, James's world had its own reaction. Sandra Okonkwo, his communications director, called him on Wednesday morning with the calm professionalism of someone who has managed wealthy people's personal decisions long enough to no longer be startled by them. She walked him through the landscape of how this story could travel if it got into certain channels. She was not alarmist. She was precise, which was why he kept her. He told her that he understood the landscape and that he was proceeding. She said, "That's what I figured. I'll prepare a statement for if and when we need it." He said, "Make sure it's short." She said, "I was going to make it the shortest statement I've ever written." It was 8 words, as it turned out. When the story eventually made it into the Atlanta business press, which it did in early 2021, the statement that Ellington Capital Group issued was, "Mr. Ellington considers this a private matter." 8 words. It was widely shared. James Ellington and Cora Mae Webb did not rush. This is not a story about 2 people who were reunited and immediately swept into something cinematic and conclusive. They were both in their 40s. They had both lost things. They had both built themselves back up from those losses in ways that gave them a particular kind of steadiness that does not accommodate being swept anywhere. He drove back to Atlanta that first afternoon. He called that Sunday. They talked for 2 hours about things that had nothing to do with what was happening between them, which is one of the best signs that something is actually happening between 2 people, when they can talk about everything else with ease. He came back to Millhaven 3 weeks later. He met Marcus, who was 11 and who wanted to know, within approximately 7 minutes of meeting James, whether the car outside was actually his and what it felt like to drive it. James took Marcus on a drive around the block, which Marcus later described to his friends as the best 11 minutes of his life to that point. Arya remained measured. This was, in Cora Mae's quiet assessment, the correct response, and she told James so. She said, "Arya watches people before she lets them in. She gets that from me. Don't try to win her over. Just be consistent. She'll come to her own conclusion." He was consistent. He showed up when he said he would show up. He called when he said he would call. When Cora Mae mentioned in passing that the gutter on the south side of the house had been pulling away from the roof since summer, he was back 2 weeks later with a contractor he had vetted personally, and he sat on the porch with a cup of coffee while the work was done so that Cora Mae did not have to be alone with a stranger in her yard. Small things. The kind of things that do not make headlines and do not produce dramatic moments. The kind of things that are, in reality, the entire substance of what it means to choose another person. Arya was watching. By February of 2021, for months after the first visit, she had reached her conclusion. She told her mother privately, "He's not trying to impress you. He's just trying to be here." Cora Mae said, "I know." Arya said, "Okay, then I'm okay." She said it with the gravity of someone issuing a formal ruling, which, in the Simmons Webb household, it essentially was. James Ellington proposed on a Wednesday evening in April of 2021. He did not do it in a restaurant. He did not hire a photographer or arrange an audience. He did not do it in Atlanta, in any of the settings that a man of his resources could have arranged with a phone call. He did it on Cora Mae's front porch, at dusk, in the particular light that Millhaven produces in April, warm, soft, the kind that makes shadows long and everything gold. He had not rehearsed a speech. He had thought about one, drafted something in his head over several weeks, and then abandoned it because it sounded, in his own ears, like a prepared statement. So instead he sat beside her in the other porch chair, and he talked for a while about something entirely unrelated. The Marcus situation, specifically, because Marcus had recently announced that he intended to be an architect, and James had opinions about this that he had been waiting for the right moment to share constructively. And then, mid-sentence, he stopped. He reached into his shirt pocket. He took out the red ribbon. He had had it repackaged. Not changed, not replaced, but placed inside a small clear box so it could be seen without being handled, so it could be preserved. He set it on the small table between their chairs. He said, "I said I was coming back. I came back. I said I was going to keep the promise." He paused. He said, "Cora Mae, I would like to keep the promise." She looked at the ribbon in its little box. She looked at him. She was quiet for a long time, in the way she was quiet when she was thinking something through fully before she said it, a quality he had come to recognize over the previous 6 months as one of the things he most respected about her. Then she said, "James, do you remember what I said when you tied that ribbon on my wrist?" He said yes. She said, "Say it back to me." He said, "You said okay, James." She said, "That's what I said then. And that's what I'm saying now." She picked up the box. She held it in both hands for a moment. Then she set it back on the table and looked at him with an expression that, if you had been watching from the street, you might not have been able to read immediately. But if you knew Cora Mae Simmons, if you had known her for any significant length of time and understood the specific economy of her expressions, you would have recognized it immediately. It was the look of someone who had carried something for a very long time and had just, finally, set it down. They were married on a Saturday in September of 2021. The ceremony was at Greater Vine Baptist Church, which was appropriate, because Ruth Simmons had sung in that choir for 30 years, and the building held her voice in its walls the way certain places hold the people who love them. There were 31 people at the ceremony. Family, the innermost circle of friends, Sandra from the hospital, Beverly and Roy from James's Atlanta world, Mr. Darnell Holt, who turned out to be the son of the Mr. Augustus Holt, who had given James the biography in 7th grade, and who cried in a way that surprised everyone, including himself. Arya read a poem she had written herself. Marcus wore a suit he had picked out independently and stood very straight throughout the ceremony with the seriousness of a boy who understands that some moments require that of you. I want to ask you something before we close this story, and I want you to sit with it. Not just move past it the way we move past things in the scroll, the way we absorb something and immediately reach for the next thing. I want you to really sit with what this story is actually about. Because on the surface, the story you just heard is a love story. A boy and a girl and a promise and a return. And it is all of those things. But underneath the surface of it, underneath the ribbon and the letter and the black car on the Tuesday morning, is something that I think is much more important. What Cora Mae Simmons did when she was 9 years old was not remarkable because of its scale. She was a child. She had nothing. The resources she deployed to feed James Ellington for 5 months were minuscule by any material measure. Half a biscuit here, half a sandwich there, a traded chore, a saved portion. The scale was tiny. What was not tiny was the decision. The decision, made by a 9-year-old girl who had herself been raised with not enough, to look at another person's hunger and say, "That is mine to address." Not because anyone required her to. Not because there was a reward system in place. Not because she expected anything back. And the evidence for this is 32 years of not knowing whether she would ever see James Ellington again and keeping going anyway. She did it because Ruth Simmons had told her that you treat everybody like they might be carrying something heavy. And Cora Mae had taken that instruction and made it into herself. James Ellington, for his part, did not succeed because a girl fed him. That would be too simple and would do injustice to 32 years of his own ferocious, disciplined, unrelenting work. He succeeded because of what he was. But here is what he has said himself, more than once, in the careful way he speaks about things that matter to him. He succeeded with something underneath him. He succeeded knowing that the most impressive thing a person could do was what Cora Mae had done. See someone, really see them, and respond to what they saw without being asked and without expectation of return. He built a billion-dollar company, and his deepest standard for human excellence was a 9-year-old girl with a biscuit. I think that is worth something. I think that is worth quite a lot. And here is the question I want to leave you with. Not the easy question, not, "Isn't that a beautiful story?" but the harder one. The one I think this story is actually asking. We all know someone who is carrying something. Maybe not hunger in the literal sense. Maybe something else, loneliness, grief, the particular exhaustion of a person who has been holding everything together for too long without anyone noticing the effort. We know someone like that. And most of us, most of the time, walk past. We mean well. We are busy. We tell ourselves we will get to it. James Ellington carried a strip of red ribbon for 32 years because a girl did not walk past. She sat down in the dirt and she talked about a cartoon, and she made him feel, for 20 minutes, like his hunger was not the most important thing about him. That was the gift, not the biscuit. The dignity inside the biscuit. What would happen? And I am asking you this directly, as a genuine question, not as a rhetorical gesture. What would happen if you sat down in the dirt next to someone this week? What would happen if you found the person in your life who is standing at the back of the line, holding an empty lunch bag, hoping nobody looks too closely, and you sat down beside them and talked about something unimportant so they wouldn't feel the weight of being helped? I want to hear from you. Right now, in the comments below, I want you to tell me 2 things. First, what was the moment in this story that stopped you? Was it the sandwich? Was it the ribbon? Was it Arias saying, "Okay, then I'm okay"? Was it the letter that James almost didn't send? Tell me the moment. Second, is there a Cora Mae in your past? Someone who saw you when you were carrying something heavy and sat down beside you without making it about themselves? If there is, write their name in the comments. You don't have to tell the story. Just write the name. Because some people deserve to be named, even in a comment section, even 30 years later. That is where we are going to end this. Not with a statistic, not with a moral, just with an invitation to name someone who deserved to be named. Before you go, if this story found you at the right moment, if it gave you something you needed today, please share it. Not for the numbers. Because some stories deserve to travel further than an algorithm will take them, and the only thing that makes that happen is a person who decides it should. Subscribe if you haven't, because the next story we are covering involves a secret kept for 20 years inside a family that looked, from the outside, like the definition of everything working out. And what happened when the youngest daughter found one piece of paper that changed everything she thought she knew. That one is coming soon. I will see you there.